Greetings! I'm finally back after my typical pause for Christmas break, and I wanted to quickly catch you up on a few things that are happening behind the scenes here. First, I'm going to be interviewing Tina Hamilton about her research proposal on the psychological impact of coming out as an atheist. This promises to be very interesting and should hopefully be posted in the next week or two. You won't want to miss it. Second, there's a slim possibility that I may be participating in an event in or around Texas, possibly Dallas, sometime around the month of April this year, where there would be the potential to meet fellow YouTubers and subscribers. If you think there's a realistic chance you'd make it, please hop on over to my Facebook page and answer yes on a poll I posted. How or if this happens depends on the level of interest. And finally, YouTube has once again messed things up for small YouTubers. It doesn't impact me personally, but the Great Debate community and the Geek Room are both great channels who have lost their ability to monetize until they get a few more subscribers. If you could go check them out and possibly subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Great Debate will likely be hosting a debate between me and Greg Glyer in the near future, so you'll want to be following them anyway. Right? Right? Well, I sure hope so, because I'd hate to think you don't care about things. Most Christians believe a lot of really weird things. And I'm not just saying this for effect. They really do. For example, they believe in the Trinity, the idea that God is one person but also three separate people, even though this is flatly contradictory nonsense. They believe that God is an intelligent being who has existed eternally in a timeless state, even though this makes no sense and nothing like this has ever been observed by anyone. They believe that this God created the universe after existing from eternity past, even though eternity would have to expire before this happened, which of course it never could because the very nature of eternity is that it keeps going, and that, despite being timeless and unchanging, he somehow changed from being content by himself to wanting a creation to interact with. And they believe that God desperately wants to forgive our sins, but that he had to come to earth and be killed as a sacrifice to himself before he could do so. Now, of course, all these concepts are insane, and most Christians know they can't make sense of them. They might cope by making analogies for them, for example saying that the Trinity compares to water having solid, liquid, and gaseous states which are all still water, but those analogies are unhelpful and totally unrelated to the logical problems at hand. Or they may just state that God has qualities that make the problem go away. For example, saying that he didn't have to come from anywhere because he's timeless, or that he needs blood sacrifice because he's perfectly holy. But restating the mechanics of your mythology really doesn't solve anything, and if anything, these explanations just bring up more questions than they answer. None of this gets Christians anywhere, and they kind of know it. So if pressed hard enough, they'll usually fall back to something along the lines of, there are things that are just beyond our comprehension. God is huge, complex, and mysterious, and you can't assume he doesn't make sense just because your tiny human mind finds him unintuitive. To be fair, not all Christians are equally quick to fall back to this justification. Some spend more time than others trying to flesh out what they believe and why, and not all may explicitly put this idea into words. But the mindset does pervade Christian thinking, and I doubt that there are many, if any, believers who don't eventually retreat to some version of it when trying to understand God. Now, I'm sure you all recognize this excuse is idiotic, but for the sake of discussion, let's ignore that fact for now. Instead, let's focus on being crystal clear about the Christian approach to this problem. Things like triune beings, unchanging intelligences who change their minds, and gods who want to sacrifice themselves to themselves are all totally implausible concepts. They make no evident sense whatsoever, but Christians are still willing to accept them given no justification other than the possibility that a totally incomprehensible explanation might exist. Right? And again, I'm not criticizing this idea. I'm just trying to be clear about it. But even assuming this is all totally rational, we're still left with a simple question. Why is it that when talking about God, these Christians accept unintuitive or even contradictory ideas on the grounds that they're just beyond comprehension, but then as soon as the conversation turns to a naturalistic universe, they reverse their expectations and demand a completely accessible layman's explanation for all scientific theories, going so far as to build an entire body of apologetics around the notion that if any part of the natural universe isn't totally intuitive in light of our day-to-day human experience, then naturalism fails and God must exist. For example, they find it legitimately unintuitive that the universe began as a singularity, and since this is ridiculous to them, they assume God must exist. They reject the idea that the universe came from nothing and find it implausibly unlikely that it randomly fine-tuned itself to support life. Now, of course, one of these notions is flatly wrong and the other is fallacious, but we're not here to argue that. Rather, the point at hand is that they assume these ideas are ridiculous on the grounds that they're unintuitive, and from there assume that, yes, God exists. Even the idea that one species can slowly evolve into another, an idea that's at least comprehensible, is rejected by those who think that three distinct people are also one person, that this person fathered himself and sacrificed himself as an act of obedience to himself, and because of this was exalted to join himself in heaven. Let's appreciate that people who can buy into this reject evolution because it's unintuitive. Then they thus conclude, you guessed it, that God exists. So why do they accept these ideas but reject these ones? To be fair, I don't think they're being willfully hypocritical. It's just that, beset by doubts about their faith, they just grasp at whatever response helps them resolve whatever issue they're confronted with in the moment. When someone points out an aspect of God that doesn't make sense, they do what's needed to defend their belief, which is accept unintuitive ideas wholesale without question. But when looking to criticize a godless view of the universe, they do a complete 180 and flatly reject anything unintuitive. And they so thoroughly compartmentalize their responses to these two topics that they don't notice that one of their arguments totally contradicts the other. This is one of the saddest things about the religious mindset. In their desperation to defend specific ideas at all costs, they fail to develop a cohesive approach to knowledge, instead scrambling for any response that helps them rationalize predetermined conclusions. But then wait. Having said this, don't atheists and scientists do the same thing? Aren't they being just as inconsistent by accepting unintuitive scientific ideas while rejecting unintuitive religious ones? Well, even setting aside the issue that religious ideas are more ridiculous and obviously contradictory, the answer is still no, for a few key reasons. First, science doesn't just make up unintuitive ideas. It's confronted with them in the process of exploring the physical universe. And there's always an observation or sound theoretical model at the foundation of these ideas. Religion, on the other hand, has no such foundation. It just pulls teachings out of thin air and expects you to believe in them for no demonstrated reason whatsoever. Second, science doesn't grant absolute or undue authority to these ideas. It approaches them tentatively, only giving as much credence to them as the evidence calls for, and it's prepared to discard or revise these ideas when the data calls for it. By contrast, religion takes its unintuitive ideas as absolute, unchanging doctrine. No piece of data is going to make a Christian stop believing in the Trinity or in the atoning power of Christ's death, and these ideas are simply not up for discussion. And finally, science puts unintuitive ideas into proper context. You aren't compelled to change the way you live your life based on the Big Bang or quantum theory, meaning you can let them sit at the edge of your mind without coming to any major conclusions about them and let scientists go about their work. Religion, on the other hand, requires a much higher level of buy-in, expecting you not only to fully and unquestionably believe in weird mysteries, but to order your life around them. So we can see that the problem runs even deeper than a double standard for accepting or rejecting unintuitive ideas. Christians accept dogmatic, arbitrarily made-up nonsense while ridiculing fluid, evidence-based observations just because they get a little tricky, and, more to the point, because they challenge their predisposed religious beliefs. And then they wonder why academia doesn't take them seriously.
And does my jacket look kind of even and everything as far as this?
Yeah, a little more to your right.
Rejecting unintuitive ideas.
That?
Tiny bit more to
Christians
your
accept dogmatic, arbitrarily made-up nonsense, while ridiculing fluid, evidence-based observations just because they get a little tricky.
So it's all good now?
And